Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from today, and welcome to today's webinar, Preparing for a Post-Password Internet. My name is Peter O'Neill, and I am the president of FindBiometrics and Mobile ID World. And we have a very special webinar for you today, held in conjunction with our partners at FIDO. I can't believe it is almost 5 years since FindBiometrics introduced FIDO to the biometric industry at the Tampa Museum of Art as part of a larger identity conference. Here is the opening slide from Michael Barrett's presentation way back then, 2013. We were talking about the death of the password back then. And a lot has changed, and I am pleased to report that you will receive a complete update today. You will see just how far FIDO has come in a very short period of time. And next up for us is Money 2020 in Amsterdam, where for the third year in a row, I will be moderating the biometrics payments panel there. And if any of you are planning on attending in Amsterdam, please drop me an email, let me know, and we can meet there. With so much going on, be sure to stay on top of all the breaking news by visiting FindBiometrics and our sister site, Mobile ID World. We're now in our 17th year, and we cover the market like no one else with in-depth articles, insights, the largest yearly review of our industry, featured theme months, newsletters, interviews with leaders in this space, international speaking engagements, and of course, our now famous webinar series. And this month, all month long, we have been focusing on fast identity online FIDO. And we have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to jump right in. And actually, I think I'm going to start off with a couple of quick polls, and I'm going to launch one right now. So take a minute and please tell us approximately how many passwords, password protected accounts you have for your personal use. Take a minute and fill this in. We'll just give you another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're going to close it now, and let's just take a look at the results. Okay, here we go. Oh my, well, we can see why passwords are such a challenge, because 73% of you have more than 15 plus accounts. And that's, I think, pretty normal out there in the industry. And so that's quite interesting. I'm going to launch one more right now. And this is one that's particularly dear to me, because I had this experience in the last 3 months for sure. Within the last 3 months, have you submitted a forgotten password request on a personal account? So please take a second to fill this out, and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're going to close this poll now, and I'll just share the information with you. So let's, oh my, okay, yes. So, you know, you can see what kind of a problem we have. And I think I did it twice during the last 3 months, and it seems to be constantly affecting me. And actually, just while we're in poll mode, I'm going to launch one more. So tell us about this. How strongly do you agree with this statement? The password must die as soon as possible. Please pick one of the 4 and let us know how you feel about this. And I'm going to predict that we're probably in the strongly agree area. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're going to close it now. And let's share this information. Yep, for sure. So almost 90% or 86% agree, strongly agree. Thank you very much for taking part in that. So we're going to continue along now. And please note, if you'd like to ask a question, just type it into the dialog box in the Go To control panel on the right side of your screens. And please do this at any time. Don't wait until the end, because we will have an opportunity to manage your questions, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible at the end. And there will be many given the number of attendees today. This webinar will last about 50 minutes in total and will be recorded and available at FindBiometrics.com. I'd now like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for their continuing support, Aware, Dayon, and Knock Knock, and a very special thanks to the FIDO Alliance. And to start off our discussions today, I am so pleased that FIDO Alliance Executive Director Brett McDowell is able to join us. Brett and I continually run into each other at many of the hot global conferences focusing on identity, and Brett has kindly offered to provide our attendees with an update on the most recent news and activities from the FIDO Alliance. And there is some big news that will change the way we all access the web. Please take it away, Brett.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here and pleasure to work with you as always. But I want to go back to one of your poll questions. There is no way that 27% of the people on this call have fewer than 15 password protected accounts. What I think they were actually answering is how many accounts they share the same password across.
Interesting.
Right, which really gets us to the problem that we formed the FIDO Alliance to address back in 2012, and launched, as you said, in 2013 with some of your support, and that is the password problem. So here are some statistics. There are many more you can point to. They all add up to the same thing, which is passwords have been a security problem. They're exploited to do financial harm and harm in other ways. And the problem only gets worse year over year. So if this isn't motivation, just wait till next year, because these numbers will be worse. So over 80% of data breaches can be traced back to stolen and weak passwords. That's a rather recent study. 1 in 14 phishing attacks just in 2016 are successful. These attacks aren't getting, you'd like to think that we're all getting smarter, that we can train the users. We've had over a decade of trying to train users to not click on links, not type their password into fraudulent websites. These are highly effective, and they're so inexpensive to launch this type of attack. This is tremendous ROI if you're out there trying to steal credentials. And then data breaches. Data breaches up year over year, 45%. And again, that's higher than the last year over year. So as a security and fraud problem, the password just gets worse and the attacks just get better. But there's also a story on usability. So passwords, they're difficult to use. So not only do we have this existential threat, the viability of trust online being compromised and getting to a tipping point, we also have the usability challenge. So at FIDO, we decided to set out, and we had the founders who had a lot of experience, the people involved in putting the alliance together. I was one of them. When I was at PayPal, I was responsible for our authentication product portfolio and security. So I was responsible for those second factor one-time passcode tokens and the one-time passcode SMS messages that we would send out for those that opted in. And I and others involved in creating FIDO Alliance knew that those opt-in rates were very, very low. We were never going to even get a majority of our users to opt in for extra steps to make them more secure. So the usability goes down, and whenever you add extra steps to make a user more secure, unless you can mandate those steps, which you can't on the open, competitive commercial internet, then you're going to get very low opt-in rates. So we knew we had to improve the user experience, or we're wasting our time in trying to improve security. So I think you'll see that the way we designed FIDO, we've achieved both. And we've done that by open standards. We also couldn't address the password problem at scale without an open standard. The problem is too big for any one company, even any one country, to solve on their own. And we use public key cryptography to deliver on the promise of better security, essentially killing scalable attacks and phishing by eliminating the shared secret attack vectors and the replay attack vectors. And we designed all of this to happen with a single gesture user experience. You can get a strong multi-factor authentication by just asking the user to do something as simple as touch a button or look at a camera. So how does it work? Now, today is not a technical talk. This is as technical as we're going to get. So here's a picture of FIDO in action. So you have the user, and this authenticator concept is what FIDO really brought to the table. Before this, the user had secrets. They gave the secrets directly to the application. It was passed over the internet, and that means that any application that could trick the user into giving them the credential could walk away with the credential and use it against the actual target application. So here with the FIDO Authenticator, this is a capability. Sometimes this can be a capability in a dedicated device like a security key, or it's a capability in your multi-purpose device, like your fingerprint sensor can be FIDO enabled, your camera can be FIDO enabled. The FIDO Authenticator, when you're registering your first FIDO credential, so you're still going to use the same username, but instead of the password being the secret's really this private key that is created by the authenticator on the user's device. And the public key that's paired to that, that's what gets registered with the application's database in the cloud. So that later, when the application needs to re-authenticate the user, they send the challenge. FIDO's a challenge response protocol fundamentally. The authenticator takes over and verifies the user. They could be doing this with a PIN number, they could be doing it with a biometric, and then the authenticator signs the challenge if they prove that it's the correct user who's present, and that signed challenge goes back to the server, and because of the signature, the application knows I could have only gotten this result if the correct device and the correct user participated. I have a strong multi-factor what you have and what you are authentication with what was just probably a very simple experience like touching a fingerprint sensor, for example. And now who's using this? Like, where are we on our journey? FIDO standards have been in market since the end of 2014, and we have deployments that have been operating at scale with hundreds of millions of devices out there and billions of accounts that offer FIDO as an option. These are just some of the companies that have FIDO services live today. Google, Facebook, Microsoft most recently, PayPal, one of the first deployments, but also new services like T-Mobile and Intuit, Stripe, a real rising star in payments, Salesforce. We have enterprise deployments and commercial deployments. We have security key as a second factor on web deployments, and we have embedded all-in biometric mostly mobile device deployments with now biometrics coming to the Windows desktop with Windows Hello in Windows 10. So just taking inventory of what the FIDO standards are. FIDO UAF and U2F, that's Universal Authentication Framework, Universal Second Factor. Those, excuse me, those are the specifications that we first published in 2014. And we've updated since, and those are developed by the FIDO Alliance. And then we have this new project, so now I'm going to start giving you some updates. The FIDO 2 project was our mission, even though we saw tremendous adoption, hundreds of millions of devices shipping FIDO capability so that you could just turn it on with services. We knew that if we were going to get ubiquity, we had to bring FIDO into every internet-connected device, and nothing short of that. And so we knew we wanted to have FIDO embedded into the operating systems and the web browsers that everyone's going to be using now and going forward. So that was the mission of the FIDO 2 project. And the result are basically these two specifications. CTAP, which is Client to Authenticator Protocol. This is a device-to-device protocol so that I can be using an external authenticator with my host device. So if I'm on a computer and I'm in a web session, and I either don't have an embedded FIDO authenticator on that computer, or I just don't want to re-register a FIDO credential because I already registered one on my external security key or smartphone, then I can just use that security key or smartphone to authenticate. I don't need a FIDO authenticator on that host device. So that's what CTAP adds. And then WebAuthn is the JavaScript API that allows a website to FIDO enable its login once and then work across all of the web browsers. And that's because of our partnership with the W3C. And what we've done there is we've made contributions to the W3C. They've formed the Web Authentication Working Group. And recently, within the last couple of months, they announced a major milestone that the WebAuthn specification has reached candidate recommendation status. It essentially means it's fit for commercial use and it's a call for implementation. And what we see is that this new JavaScript API that any website can call, and if the browser supports it, they'll be able to talk to authenticators on the platform or external authenticators through the platform. On the far right here, I'm going to start telling you the status of everybody, all the major players in the ecosystem. So Google's Android has API capabilities, and they're not just in the latest version of Android. Google is very clever and decided to implement their FIDO support in Google Play services, which means that they're going to get several generations of Android all at once with this update. The Mozilla Firefox browser is already now FIDO enabled for these use cases. Windows 10, Windows Hello is FIDO enabled now with their Redstone 4 release for enterprise use cases. The Edge browser is coming in the fall, as we understand from them. And then Google has had Chrome has had FIDO support in Chrome since 2014, and now they have this kind of multi-factor full FIDO2 use case capability in Chrome, and that's also now live, both desktop and mobile. And Apple, of course, not one to make a lot of pre-release announcements. What we can say about Apple is that they're participating in the Web Authentication Working Group, and so that bodes well for anyone hoping to see Safari get FIDO enabled. And what we're doing to ensure that any new application has maximum reach across their user base, which would really come from this promise that any FIDO certified device can work with your application, whether that be web application or native application. To get there, we offer now this new FIDO Universal Server certification, which means the server is able to interoperate with any previously certified FIDO device. Another update, everyone's talking about GDPR these days. This is the new regulation coming out of Europe. And the good news is the FIDO helps companies comply with GDPR. From the beginning, FIDO has had a very privacy by design approach to biometrics. I think we saw Apple first succeed in the consumer space with that message when they rolled out Touch ID, which was after the FIDO Alliance formed, by making sure that users who were first confronted with this, consumer market fingerprint experience understood that their fingerprint data wasn't ever going to leave the device, and that's been also in the FIDO model even before that milestone. So we think that resonates with users. We were going to do that anyway, and it turns out to be the least expensive, lowest impact way to comply with GDPR, which treats biometric data as special, sensitive data that needs special attention. And in fact, you're prohibited from sharing biometric data under GDPR unless you go through some costly exercises like the impact assessments and things that regulators are going to require. And on top of that, country by country, they might require even more regulation than what's in the general directive. And we have written a paper about this. Here's some great Mobile ID World coverage of that paper if anyone wants to go to that, visit that link after the webinar. So those are just some of the recent updates on how things are progressing in the land of FIDO. And now I'm really looking forward to Q&A. Thank you, Peter.
Brett, thank you so much. Boy, there's a lot been happening, and a lot really recently. This really does change the way we access the web, doesn't it?
Well, that's the thing. Now that FIDO authentication is the strong authentication standard for the web, per the web's standard body, the W3C, we're going to see this be the norm. This is no longer an innovation. This is no longer a pilot proof of concept technology. This has been deployed at scale for years and now adopted for the web. So when every web browser can do it, and you start seeing the more popular forward-leaning websites, and you just look at the FIDO Alliance membership, and you can imagine, who's going to be first to market with these, kind of biometric, FIDO-based biometric use cases for logging in on the web, then it's just become the new norm.
Well, thanks, Brett. This timing couldn't be better for that update, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. Now I'd like to introduce our three other panelists. Joining us from Aware, David Benini, who is the Vice President of Marketing. From Dayon, James Ahern, Chief Technology Officer. And from Knock Knock Labs, Rajiv Dokara, who is VP Business Development. Welcome to you all. And the first question is this really finally the death of the password online? As Brett had mentioned, and as that 2013 slide indicated, we have been talking about this for a while, but 5 years is not that long a time in terms of trying to get this kind of thing happening. Rajiv, can you start us off on this? Are we finally, at that point where it's all going to start to really change, especially for end users?
Yes, indeed, Peter. Thank you for that introduction. And what I'd say is that FIDO provides that solid foundation to build on towards the death of passwords. And I think maybe a few metrics to look at. If you look at the ease of use test for substituting and replacing passwords, I think FIDO meets that test because it allows you to use effectively any modality, whether it's tokens or biometrics or integrated tokens and biometrics in wearables. If you look at the security test, it meets and exceeds, well exceeds that test with respect to the level of security that it brings. If you look at the privacy test, it passes that as well, as Brett referred to. In terms of privacy by design, it eliminates shared secrets. It eliminates the need to pass things like biometrics to the server. If you look at the ubiquity and use cases test, at this point, FIDO's been deployed out just for Knock Knock Labs to over 100 million plus users, over a diversity of use cases in cloud, mobile, IoT, in fintech, in M&O, in healthcare, in IoT. And so I think it meets the use case test. And then finally, the economics use case, which is not all use cases have the same level of economics associated with them. If your average profitability per customer is sub $2, there are limitations to what kinds of security mechanisms and authentication mechanisms you're able to use. And FIDO embraces a diversity of these mechanisms. And the nice thing is that this is now very widely supported in all platforms, all use cases, all platforms. And with the arrival of FIDO 2, which is effectively FIDO for the web browser, I think that you have a very solid foundation to build upon to drive to the death of passwords.
Well, thank you, Rajiv. And David, you and I have had many discussions about this over the years. Do you really think this is finally the death of the password online?
Well, I think we're long overdue. Passwords were designed for a very, very different environment. And I think what FIDO has done is really just put all the pieces in place that you really need to build a secure solution, the certification, the interop, the documentation. So I think it'll be a transition. It'll take some time till we finally see passwords disappear beneath the horizon. But I think it's going to accelerate in the next couple of years, and within 5 years, it'll just be kind of a given that we're not needing to use passwords for these kinds of applications.
Well, and especially when you see who's involved, when you see those big names, these are the leaders in the space. That's got to help as well.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah. James, can I get your take on this? Is this the death?
So I would say, to quote a famous leader, it's not the end, it's not even the beginning of the end, but it is the end of the beginning. I think that where we'll see the step change in behaviors with the adoption of FIDO to web browsers and all our platforms. I think that is going to be the transformational step. The original FIDO protocols have been a fantastic step forward for the industry in showing the way that biometrics and local private keys can make our experiences more convenient and more secure. But having the technology adopted and built into our browsers and our platforms, which we use every day, will really be the harbinger for the death of the password. It won't happen immediately, but over time, this is going to become the game changer that needs to be, so that we will see a transformational step in the industry as we move away from passwords.
Well, and as we were talking, I think end users are desperate for this solution. There's so much frustration. Whenever we have a gathering or a talk or a webinar, the feedback we get is that consumers are fed up. They want to see change quickly. So thank you very much for that. Next question: how important is the availability of multimodal biometrics when it comes to the adoption of standard-based authentication? And David, could I ask you to kick us off on this one, please?
Sure. So yeah, we're pretty focused on this area. We're providing biometric authenticators using face, voice, and keystroke. And we see a lot of reasons why it makes sense to provide them either as options to use independently or to apply them at the same time simultaneously to get better performance or, say, better liveness detection capabilities. I think it's just another step in the evolution of this and where it's going. Another advantage is the ability to use different modalities based on the application or the environment. Sometimes a face is the best thing to use, voice is the best to use, or even keystrokes. So really achieving kind of a multi-channel authentication is something that's also driving multimodal. So yeah, we're very much pursuing that technique.
Thank you very much. James, can I get your opinion, please?
Yeah, multimodal for us is a very important concept. The ability to be able to offer choice at a minimum to users and how they authenticate. We all know that while biometrics are a great way to authenticate, they have their own limitations. And being able to offer choice in this area eliminates much of the downside associated with it. And as David said, being able to apply it across multiple channels. So while we're talking about the FIDO standards, clearly they help in the online world, but in the areas like the call center, etc., voice biometrics have an important part to play. So multimodal certainly has an important contributing factor to helping us to eliminate passwords.
And Brett, is this a topic of conversation when you're having your internal meetings, multimodal biometrics?
Well, internal and external. So the main reason, the closer you get to the executive office, the more often they're going to say, we invested in FIDO because it gives user choice. That's the message that really resonates with the business. It was very important in the design of FIDO that we left user verification out of scope. How you perform user verification is out of scope. Once the authenticator verifies the user, then the FIDO standardization kicks in. There's a standard way to, send a message, communicate what's been done. But we wanted innovation to thrive. We didn't want to say in 2013 that, it's all going to be fingerprint forever, and et cetera, right? Pick your favorite modality. We didn't want to bank on that. And that's the beauty of FIDO. You don't have to. You FIDO enable your infrastructure once, and then a device that's FIDO enabled, they can get different types of user verification solutions and follow the market, follow the users, what users want to use from one year to the next. I mean, again, I keep picking on Apple because they've invested so much in bringing biometrics to the consumer market. Who knew they were going to lean so heavily on face replacing fingerprint, especially after such a strong run with Touch ID. So you just never know where the market's going to go and what users are going to prefer. And so that's why FIDO is your future-proof choice.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the next question. FIDO 2 is clearly a victory for security and convenience. But how does it affect end user privacy, both in general and specifically in regards to new GDPR and PSD2 regulations? I know that Brett had talked a little bit about this, but James, can I get your take on this? James is joining us from Dublin today, so you're over near that market, and what are your feelings about this?
Well, we're very much in the market in terms of GDPR, Peter. You know, the great thing about the original FIDO, even in advance and without even knowing that GDPR was going to occur, FIDO was designed with very strong privacy principles in mind. As Brett had talked about at the start, you know, the user authentication data, whether that be knowledge or biometrics, doesn't leave the device, right? So that allows us to be able to operate in a world where, in GDPR world, where the privacy of the individual in terms of the biometrics and even in terms of a PIN they may be using to authenticate remains on the device. So the ability to be able to compromise those large databases of biometrics or of passwords suddenly disappears. And it's no longer a concern for the enterprise if they're going to deploy it for their consumers or even for their employees. So it has been designed allowing not only to manage the privacy of the biometric data or the password data that may be used to as part of the authenticator, but it also allows to support the isolation of users across multiple service providers. Such meticulous detail when it's into designing the protocols, it prevents service providers from colluding to track users across the service providers. In addition, it allows a person to assume multiple identities for the service provider and doesn't allow service providers to collate those identities. Such detail went into the design of the protocols. These principles have served it so well in a world of GDPR. I certainly feel very confident that we're going to see the advantages that come out as people deploy it.
Well, thank you very much. Rajiv, can I get your take on this one, please?
Oh, I think that James framed this very well. I think when Knock Knock and PayPal and Lenovo originally put this together, these were some of the principles that we brought to the table from a design perspective based on our experience doing encryption and security solutions at scale. And while GDPR, I think, is one major piece of legislation that everybody's focused on, there are really regulatory regimes around the world and various standards that have been propagated now by advisory standards and regulatory standards both, by everyone ranging from NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technologies, to the European Union governing bodies around banking that are working on things like PSD2. And what you'll find is that these principles have resonance in many of these pieces of advisory regulation or specific regulation for particular markets. So I'm very pleased to see FIDO be able to meet those out of box, so to speak.
Great. And I'm going to keep moving along because we have a lot of questions. We're getting a lot of questions in from the audience. So please, just a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please do it now because I'm going to get to those questions pretty soon. But Rajiv, you mentioned banking and you know, one of the hot vertical markets embracing FIDO authentication is the fintech financial services area. It will be a hot topic both on my panel in Amsterdam, but generally throughout the whole Money 2020 show. But can I just touch base on what are the vertical markets that are embracing FIDO authentication? You know, we talked a little bit about fintech and financial services. What other ones, and why is this happening? And Brett, maybe I could ask you to start off on this one, please.
Sure. So where do you feel the two pain points the most, right? We talked about it in the opening slides. You've got a security and fraud pain point where, you know, outsiders can steal credentials and commit fraud. Then you have the usability pain point where if all I have available to me to challenge the user is like mother's maiden name or password, I'm going to get those checkout abandonment rates in e-commerce. So it's the payments industry that feels both of those pain points probably more acutely than any other vertical market. And that's why they're kind of rushing to FIDO, and you see it in the FIDO Alliance membership as well as the early deployments. But in addition to that is the bank, and the bank doesn't necessarily rush into innovation too quickly. They're regulated and they are held to certain requirements. Those requirements are moving fast for regulation in Europe in particular, but also pockets around the world where they're enforcing multi-factor authentication on all transactions with their regulated financial institutions because they want to raise the floor. They see this tipping point problem I talked about with passwords. And so with FIDO, there's a way for a regulator to show, or for a regulated entity to show the regulator they've done due diligence, because there's a third-party certification program. That's also a big part of this story. They say, oh, I only trust FIDO authenticators that meet the strong customer authentication requirements under PSD2. That would be a level 2 authenticator, by the way. And here's my system where I know that I'm only registering level 2 authenticators, as one example.
Well, thank you very much, David. Where are you seeing? And I know that you participate in the fintech financial services area. Are there other ones, or is that the main one that you see growing right now?
They're the first. They're the majority of the engagements we have currently. I think enterprise is also really interesting and growing in recognition of the value. I mean. Just about any enterprise has so much valuable data and resources to protect. The risks are high. And so FIDO makes sense. It could be implemented in kind of a transitional way, as like kind of a step up, like an out of band. Lots of people working at home. So there's applications like that we see coming forward. I'm also kind of interested in things like IoT and voice recognition, areas where voice is being used, such as in a car or Alexa. These types of kind of voice-driven applications also hold some promise to apply voice recognition and speaker recognition and kind of a FIDO package to perform authentication where passwords just don't make any sense.
Boy, the growth in the voice side of the industry has been quite dramatic. Everything from talking to your robots to talking to your cars, but IoT all over the place. It's how we're going to communicate with all these devices. So couldn't agree more. I'm going to keep moving along. Again, we're getting a lot of questions in. So there are use cases for FIDO solutions.
Peter,
yep.
Peter, sorry to interrupt. I think just maybe useful to point out that besides fintech, meaning payment companies and banks, we've also seen a large swath of adoption across mobile network operators. So, for Knock Knock Labs, as a founder of the FIDO Alliance, we've been doing this for a while. We have 4 of the largest MNOs in the world as our customers, one of the largest healthcare companies in the United States, the largest maker of physical door locks and access control systems. Gallagher is a customer of ours. So, you could really pretty much pick any vertical and you'll probably see a use case for FIDO deployed somewhere among the ecosystem. And the use cases across those have some commonalities for securing access to a cloud application for purposes of commerce, payments, wholesale, retail banking. There's all kinds of interesting applications, even ranging out to withdrawing money from ATMs that have been deployed out as part of the FIDO ecosystem.
Well, thank you very much, Rajiv. And you actually mentioned 3 of some of my favorite areas. We've been talking a lot about healthcare and the growth that market is going to experience. We see it where fintech was 5 years ago. They're just moving into all of this now. Retail, I think, is going to be an explosive market because, as Brett was saying, the amount of people who just give up online because they're asked with a password question. And at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, which is, a telecom show, boy, the growth there is incredible. So thank you very much for bringing those up. And there are other use cases of FIDO solutions working in concert with server-enabled security like behavioral biometrics. Is there room for collaboration and cooperation across the on-device and on-server divide. And Rajiv, maybe you could start us off on this one, please.
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Absolutely. And I think maybe a good place to start that discussion is to think about the basic authentication event where you are authenticating yourself to an online service, after which typically there is a session that is being maintained where you're not being challenged for every round trip that you're making up into the server to access a service or a resource of some kind. A very typical use of how something like behavioral biometrics works with something like FIDO is that FIDO serves, if you will, as the first mile, which establishes the user's and the device's authenticity. And then once that has been set into place during the session in order to maintain the integrity of the session, you may end up using techniques like behavioral biometrics to enhance the security of that session as the second mile of the problem. And so that's a pattern that we've seen deployed with our solutions.
Thanks. James, can I get your feedback, please?
Yeah, speaking as a vendor with, I guess, a foot in both camps, we see absolutely merits in both on-device and on-server biometrics. In fact, we look at it as almost a customer journey, which often starts out with an onboarding process where you may see the driver's license scanning or the passport scanning being matched against the face data to provide confidence in the documentation that's been presented. And then moving on to where FIDO credentials are provisioned onto the device and subsequent authentications are using the FIDO protocols. So there you're seeing both on-server and on-device capabilities being brought together. And then, to round it all out, when you're often seeing the account recovery use cases, whether that be through the call center or actually through the mobile device, where the user has lost possession of their former credentials. Again, what we see is the ability to be able to use on-server capabilities like biometrics, to be able to re-establish the connection between their user and their account. So we definitely see the ability to be able to use both capabilities for on-server and on-device together. Some markets are very much willing to use those capabilities.
I could just quickly add that this is Dave. We have a paper on the topic on our website, talks about the various pros and cons. But I think several of our customers who have implemented server are doing so for one of two reasons. Either they have data already that they want to use in some way for the authentication function, or they want to use this data that they're collecting from the users for some other purpose. So that is at least the most common. Those are the most common motivations for using a server-based approach.
David, thank you very much. Brett, I'm going to give you the final word on this question, please.
Well, I'll just give another perspective on it. With FIDO being a global initiative, you find yourself in a very different environment than the US market, for example, where you're in a country and by law, there's going to be a biometric match that happens to identify the user before even a commercial service can be provisioned. And we're starting to see, I'm not going to say it's the ubiquitous global trend, but certainly India's Aadhaar program has popularized that as an option. And one of the projects I work on is with the World Bank, and looking at what are the best practices for EID, national identity schemes in developing countries, and they're looking at what India has done quite a bit, and that's not the only country. So sometimes it isn't a subjective choice. It's simply part of the legal framework you find yourself in. And so one of the takeaways that I've heard is, match on server for identification, match on device for authentication. And that seems to be a pretty reasonable rule of thumb going forward.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to jump into some of the questions from the attendees. And the first question here, does the FIDO 2 standard stop cookie replay that occurs when a user logs in to a fake website that captures the user's cookie? So does the new FIDO 2 standard stop cookie replay that occurs when a user logins to a fake website that captures their user's cookie? Does that, Brett, maybe you could see if you could deal with that question, please.
Sure, maybe I'll I'll do this as a partnership with Rajiv, but basically the answer to these types of attacks is that you don't get that far with FIDO. You don't get through an authentication on a fake site. One of the features of FIDO to block attacks like this, any kind of man-in-the-middle or social engineering attack, is it's web bound, your web origin bound. So FIDO challenges are only going to be signed if they came from a server over a secured TLS session from the very specific domain that the private keys on the device know about and registered with. So you can't take someone through a FIDO authentication to a spoof site to get into cookie share session hijacking. Essentially, it doesn't work with FIDO.
Great. Okay, and I'm just going to keep moving along because we have a lot of questions. There's 3 questions dealing with liveness detection. So I'm just going to try and put this into one question. How much of a priority is liveness detection in the on-device area? David, maybe you could start us off on this one, please.
Yeah, sure. So this is absolutely a very big activity here, and it's an integral part of the authenticators that we provide. It tends to be it's a challenging problem, particularly with face. But there's a lot of things that we're doing that mostly solve the problem. There's passive and active approaches. There's blank detection, for example, but there's more sophisticated things that we can do in a passive way that doesn't interfere with the user experience. We can also apply different modalities that also kind of not only improve the biometric performance and accuracy, but also make it much harder to spoof an authenticator. For example, doing face simultaneously with voice or keystroke we find is really effective in detecting a spoof. But it's absolutely a critical part of this whole story.
And James, as a CTO, I'm sure you have a view on this about live. Are you getting this faced with this a lot in the marketplace now?
Yeah, certainly. Liveness is a very important component of any biometric solution. And the way I explain to customers is that there's a range of techniques available to help support and provide liveness and anti-spoofing technologies. But what's really interesting about this area is that, year on year, the technologies that are available to detect spoof attacks are getting better and better. And unlike passwords, where the only way we got improved security was by making them longer or more complex, these algorithms are actually improving in the background, and all the user gets is a better experience. So,
great.
We are seeing improvement.
Thank you very much.
Peter,
sorry, go ahead.
This is Brett. I just need to add that FIDO Alliance is launching a pure biometric certification program for the biometric components of a subset of FIDO authenticators, and this is purely testing the biometric performance of that particular capability on a FIDO authenticator, and we require presentation attack detection ability on all devices to get through that program. So that program will launch in the next few months, and we're doing it to keep nudging best practices forward across the industry.
Brett, congratulations on that. That's a much needed service. Next question, and I think this may be the last because I apologize for going long, but boy, these are good questions. Why do so many organizations still require us to input a password to keep our biometrics active? Surely this is counterintuitive. Who'd like to take that one?
This is Rajiv. So I think that there is a security model behind all of the thinking that goes into these decisions. In the end, the choice of how to construct a threat model and security model is up to the relying party and the risks that they perceive. And sometimes they've convinced themselves that they'd like to factor in something in addition to something you have and something you are. What I can say is that for our customers, and a good number of those are now finally circling use cases that really do eliminate a password. So in the sense that if you're bringing a new customer on board, that you can onboard them without the usage of a password or giving them a password at all. And perhaps if you're looking for scenarios around device loss and recovery, that there are mechanisms to go service those use cases without the usage of passwords or PINs or secrets that have led to the kinds of pain and problems that you have today. But I suspect that part of the reason that these folks sometimes insist on using a password to reactivate is that they've built a convoluted security model and would like to use something you know in addition to something you have and something you are.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, that is going to be the end of our conversation today. I want to again thank our sponsors, Knock Knock, Dayon, and Aware for their continued support, and especially to Brett McDowell for his wonderful updates today. Please join us in September. We're off for the summer now for webinars. And in September, we'll be talking about government applications for biometrics. This concludes our webinar today, and I hope to see some of you in Amsterdam next week. Again, please reach out if you're planning on going. Thank you very much. Bye.